Hello, everybody, and welcome to another really exciting episode of Howdy Partner. I'm really excited and happy to be here and get back to the show with another really awesome partner that we have today. And just, yeah, really excited to show you guys what we have in store. So before we kick things off, feel free to tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. And yeah, drop your questions in. And really excited to have you guys here. So, to kick things off, I also have Rich joining me here from AWS. So Rich, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Howdy Partner?
Hey, of course, Mansi. My name is Ulrich Bosquet. I'm a partner solutions architect with AWS, and today we are in another episode of Howdy Partner. And if you ask, what is Howdy Partner? Howdy Partner is a developer-focused show that puts AWS partners in the spotlight to show you all their products works and all they're building on AWS. And today we have Oak9 team with us. And Oak9 team, if you want to present yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mansi and Rich. My name is Om Vyas. I'm Chief Product Officer and co-founder at Oak9, and I'm really excited to work with Mansi and Rich on this Howdy Partner, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for having us, Mansi and Rich. I'm co-founder and CTO here at Oak9.
Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, really great to have you guys be joining us today. And so basically, Akash and Om today are going to be talking to us a little bit about infrastructure as code, talking about security aspects with it, how to automate it and do dynamic security for your infrastructure as code. And then they'll also be giving us a really awesome demo on how to continuously monitor and secure your infrastructure with Oak9. So who should be watching this? Rich, why don't you tell us we should have join us today?
Hey, who should watch us today? Who and why? Developers, DevOps professionals, and really anyone who's interested in learning more about security and infrastructure as a code in general. If you're interested about these two aspects, then you're welcome. And how do you follow along? You can basically go and learn more about the product that we're going to share and access the public repo, the links that we're going to share in the chat. And then from there, you can follow along with us. We also want you to interact, and please don't be shy. Interact with us, put your comment and your question in the comment section, and we will be more than happy to answer them there and even after the show. How? Okay. Now let's get started, Bensi. Let's get started with the team. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit more about cloud security and infrastructure security. Um, as your business grows, it can be difficult to keep your infrastructure secure, and it becomes even more difficult to keep your code secure, and even when you're using infrastructure as a code tool like CloudFormation. And before someone start asking, hey, what is CloudFormation? And I've got good news for you. AWS CloudFormation is a service that helps you model and set up AWS resources so that you can spend less time managing those resources and more time focusing on your application that run on AWS. And today, infrastructure as a code helps automate a lot of aspects of cloud deployment and provisioning. And with that, security risks are also rising. And now it requires developers to have better security policies that streamline with security measures. You know, some of the non-security risks that developers are facing right now with infrastructure as a code are, by example, secrets management, principle of least privilege, infrastructure as a code template, ghost resources, data transmission risk, and audit logs. And just to name a few, those are the large security risks that developers are seeing right now. And this is why we have Oak9 team with us today that will walk us through the benefits of securing your infrastructure as a code and how to do it. This is what important, how to do it in a secure manner. And they have the tool that can show you how to do it and the benefits and why to do it. And see, I can get back to you.
Awesome. And again, for those of us that are joining us a little bit late, For today's episode, we're going to be talking about infrastructure as code with our friends here at Oak9. So we have Om and Akash joining us from Oak9. And we're just about to dive a little bit deeper into their product offering. And yeah, so do you guys want to take it away, Om and Akash?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we should, Rich, thanks for sharing kind of the momentum that infrastructure as code is getting. And, just to touch and extend on that, it's what we're really seeing with the industry, with a lot of our AWS customers is that, not only, they're building complex cloud native workloads by taking advantage of a lot of the capabilities that AWS offers. But we're seeing development engineering teams make tens of hundreds of changes a day and release those into production. And this is really possible uh, with infrastructure as code, right? That automation is really a key enabler in driving a lot of this velocity. And as you pointed out, the velocity is key to business differentiation. But how do you actually ensure that, from securing your infrastructure perspective, how can you actually do that while you're building that, while you're changing that? I'll give you a quick example. Some of our customers, they're able to deploy in an entire analytics capability with what used to take me, 8, 10 years ago, a couple of months to do. Now they're able to deliver it within a sprint. So when we're talking about that level of velocity and that level of trend, how do you actually ensure that your entire cloud workload that's running in AWS, that you've considered all of the areas where security should be applied, how you should apply it, to what level of rigor you should apply? And as a developer by trade, I want to be able to build that in, right? Versus being able to identify security issues post deployment. And Akash, jump in, right? Your background is cybersecurity, and what are some of the trends and challenges that you see from your perspective?
Yeah, the big shift that we're seeing is more and more organizations are leveraging infrastructure as code to deliver their applications. Is, if I was to, kind of piggyback on what you said, Om, right? Really, as more and more companies have shifted to the cloud, and a lot of transformations for companies that weren't born in the cloud, their journey is, hey, let's lift and shift workloads to the cloud. Let's refactor, let's build microservice-based architectures. Let's leverage more of those cloud native capabilities. And as you do that, right, you inherently reach a point where it's just really hard to manage that infrastructure through the AWS console, through the CLI, and you need automation to support that, right? So, what I've seen over my career is companies reach this point and then really are it's an inevitable journey for them to leverage infrastructure as code like CloudFormation, like Terraform, to really, automate how these applications are deployed. And the big trend that we're seeing then is entire application architectures are now represented in this codified view that CloudFormation, Terraform create. And what that does for security is, it creates a moving target. So what I've seen dev teams do is now, changes are happening, as you said, tens to hundreds of times a day. And really fundamental changes to the application architecture are happening, several times a day. And really dev teams are able to, update the application architecture to serve the needs of their application very quickly. And so when this is happening, really as a security architect, if I was assessing this application architecture, it's now a moving target for me. What I assessed 2 weeks ago is no longer what is actually deployed. The architecture has changed because development teams are now more and more empowered to really change that architecture. And one thing that I know, you've seen throughout your career, right? Like I'll bounce it back to you, is like, what is that trend you're seeing in terms of ownership, right, of this infrastructure as code? How, who's managing it in these organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right? Like part of that velocity is really a catalyst. There is the development engineering having full ownership, right? No longer are developers only focused on building application code and sort of, relying on IT operations to say, hey, go deploy this, right? It's really, when we think about the DevOps as a cultural transformation, DevSecOps, what we're really saying is that there's an onus of shared responsibility across dev engineering, across cloud ops and DevOps, to say, hey, let's automate the artifacts that get generated, that the dev teams work on generating, and let's work together to automate and deploy that in the cloud. But then also it's about operation and monitoring, right? So development teams are more and more have full ownership of what types of architectures do they want to build. What sorts of capabilities in AWS they want to build into their architecture to enable the capabilities that the business is requiring. And then, as you said, right, what happens post deployment on the operations and monitoring. And there's a comment on the chat here about having dev, test, and prod environments being exactly the same. So that's another challenge, right? Development teams are tinkering constantly in the dev and sandbox environment. So as you make these changes, tens and hundreds of changes a day, as security teams, as DevOps teams, how do you actually ensure that all of these environments are in sync, that we're not seeing drift in the environment? So there's an added level of complexity, and a lot of that ownership and onus is falling more and more on dev engineering groups, DevOps engineering groups.
Yeah, and you and I have chatted about this a lot, right? But Mansi, one thing that we like to talk about is really we see a new role developing, right? A role of an infrastructure developer, right? Someone that is really developing this cloud native infrastructure in AWS, and that person lives and breathes CloudFormation and Terraform and infrastructure as code languages, and is really focused on how do I iteratively deliver infrastructure. And so I'm going back to the question that you had asked me, right? Really, then as a security architect, the challenge that I face is now there's 100,000 lines of CloudFormation that's changing on a day-to-day basis, and the unlike application code, when changes are being made to CloudFormation, these are changes to the application architecture. And so those changes are foundational to the application. They absolutely need to be assessed from a security standpoint, but there's no way, right? I have the bandwidth, or any security team in the world, right, has the bandwidth to review code in that manner. And, more importantly, like I can tell you most security engineers that I've worked with, right, like we are not CloudFormation experts. We're not Terraform experts. And so making sense of, what these 100,000 lines of code, what architecture this is deploying is actually an incredibly hard challenge. And it's not like, most security teams are already drowning. We're all resource constrained. There's like 1.5 million unfilled jobs in the industry right now. And so, for any security team to really scale to this challenge, right? Like it's almost infeasible today unless you have automation.
Yeah, I can definitely say, so my role before being a solutions architect at AWS, I was an infrastructure engineer and used to work a lot with CloudFormation. And yeah, I would find out security flaws after deploying it, and we would have something go wrong a couple of weeks later, and then I'd have to like frantically go and fix it. So yeah, if we had something like this earlier, it would have been amazing. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Did you, it's like, I think, we as security professionals, right, we want to engage early and help you build security in. But when we find things after the fact, right, it's always an awkward conversation to have to say, hey, I know you did all this work, right? But we're going to have to fix a whole bunch of things. And I know you have other priorities right now, but we're going to put that on hold. First, we need to address these security issues, right? Like it's just, I'm sure it's frustrating for someone like you, Mansi, or Om, right? Like
100%.
You spent an entire sprint building something, and now security's coming in and telling you like, hey, it needs to be redesigned because you didn't incorporate security.
Hey, security is job zero.
It's true.
Yep.
So, one of the things, I think, we've heard a lot in the industry, buzzwords around shift left, right? But we're talking about what we're really saying is how do we identify these issues as early as possible. And one of the things that we've done at Oak9 is and really what we are ultimately after is we talked about kind of the trends in the industry. We talked about the responsibility that the dev and the DevOps teams are having. So how do we ensure that really if I take a step back and think about Oak9's guiding principles and what we're really building and have built with our SaaS platform is, really that mantra of let's make cloud infrastructure security easy for developers, right? So as a developer, I don't want to have to be responsible for yet another thing, right? I care about security. I'm not well versed in security, but I want to be able to just understand and gain visibility at the point of time when I'm changing my infrastructure on what do I need to account for? And then, how can I actually, what are the exact things that I need to do? Give me actionable, accessible guidance, right? On how I can gain visibility into what I'm doing with my infrastructure as code, how that's impacting the security of my application. And then can you actually help me maybe even remediate that, right? So that's really what fundamentally what Oak9's guiding principles are. That's what our SaaS platform does.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Cool. So did you guys want to just jump into the demo? Is that
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
Let me share my screen and I can show a little bit of about how we're enabling this security to be built in into the changes that are happening. Give me 1 second here. I'll share my screen.
Yeah, Omen, as you pull this up, right? Like what we'd love to show you, right, is really the focus that we have on the developer and really our mission to make life easier for that developer and help them incorporate security in a very seamless manner. And so, if you're looking yeah, it's not sharing anything yet.
Not yet?
Yeah.
Okay. That should be fine.
Are we good?
Yep.
Yes.
I just want to say
right.
somebody in the comments just said that if things break, you can just roll back the stack. And I just want to say that I have nightmares from trying to roll back stacks and fixing those issues. So that is not an option.
Yeah. I think in general, though, right? Like that is one of the value propositions of infrastructure as code, right? As you move towards immutable infrastructure models, you get repeatable, consistent, modular, version controlled deployments. But I agree, Mansi, right? Like it's incredibly hard to really, in reality, right? There's a lot of nuances and rolling things back and going back to an earlier state, right, is not always an easy option. And so, if you do it right from the beginning, if you bake security in, if you get that stack right from the beginning, right, you're saving yourself a ton of work on the back end.
Yeah, definitely. For this demo, there is a public GitHub repository for anybody that wants to follow along. So I will just share that in a second, and then you can kick things off.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the first things that we talked about is, as an infra engineer, as a developer, if I'm making changes to my code, how do I ensure that at the point of time, before I've even committed that into code repository, those changes, how can Oak9 actually help me, right? How do I understand that visibility? And one of the things that we've done is we've built a CLI that integrates directly into this example that I'm sharing here is a public repo that we're using to showcase the example. And what I have here is I have a command line integrated directly into my IDE, and you'll notice here that I have a pretty large, extensive infrastructure example here. The specific one that we're focused on here is the AWS Lambda API. So, this example is generating and creating and provisioning resources across AWS. So there are some S3 buckets that are getting generated. There are Lambda functions that are getting deployed. I have my API gateway resources that I'm deploying alongside of its endpoint. So as you can see, that this code is fairly abstracted, fairly modularized, and we talked about that complexity. So as I'm making these changes, how can Oak9 help, right? So with a single command in Oak9, what I can immediately do as I'm making these changes is I can actually run a scan command on Oak9, and Oak9, what we will do is we will sift through and analyze all of the different infrastructure files here that are modularized. Well, what we're doing behind the scenes here is we're really building out an entire meta model of what are all the different resources that are getting provisioned. How are each resources configured? What are the IAM roles that are applied to it? What are those network configuration policies? What are the communication flows? And we analyze that based on reading this infrastructure as code. And then, in a little bit, we're going to talk about kind of our magic sauce, our blueprints. But think of our blueprints for now as just, security reference architectures that Oak9 is dynamically generating so that developers don't have to worry about the security aspects of this code. Oak9 does that for you. And what you should see happen here, let me expand that so you guys, everyone can see better. What Oak9 did here as we were talking is we identified down to the line and the specific files where we found the security considerations and security design gaps, right? So this is a fairly long list, but what we're after is we want to give you actionable, accessible guidance. So we want to identify what are all the resources that that you're trying to provision or change. What are all the different configurations and controls that Oak9 applied? And where did Oak9 find these issues? And so immediately, if I'm an infrastructure developer, I can go through and say, yep, I understand what I need to configure. I understand the things that I've already configured. I need to update to the Oak9's recommendation. And here are all the different capabilities, whether we're talking about TLS policies with certificate in this instance that's not configured appropriately, or we're talking about access control policies that are not set appropriately. Oak9 can immediately identify within a few seconds before the code is ever even checked in. And the advantage here is, we talked about that shift left, right? The advantage here is now Mansi, you never have to worry about post-deployment, right? You can address this or at least gain visibility in this instance very quickly on all the things that we identified in your infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually just had a quick question here. So, can we integrate Oak9 into, pipeline tools like Code Pipeline to have it run automated in like an automated way?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let me switch gears here and let me show you how Oak9 can do that. At the end of the day, our goal is really, we are developer first. So we want to be able to really integrate and fit into all of the different developer workflows and tools so that, developers can continue to stay within their ecosystem and within their tools that they're already familiar with. And we want to make truly not only security aspects of securing their workloads easy, but we want them to continue to stay in their integrated workflows. So Mansi, let me show you that example. I'll start with maybe an example for how easy Oak9 has made for a developer to integrate within their code repository, and then we can move on to showing you that similar capability as that code progresses through the pipeline into the CI/CD. So, one of the things that, one of the first things that you'll do is you'll help us understand a little bit more about the application and its requirements. So I'm going to walk Mansi, I'm going to walk everyone through setting up a project. And a project or an application is, think of it as any workload or application that you're trying to secure in your AWS environment. So the very first step is creating a project, and we'll run it live. And so we ask 5 questions. These 5 questions really help us, build out what we call a risk profile of that application, right? So it's really helping us understand, how should Oak9 think about securing this application or workload? What are its requirements? So let's set up a live example. And so the first part is deployment model. This one's pretty easy. In this instance, this workload's running in AWS, so it's a publicly deployed workload. But if you have a hybrid workload where maybe parts of your data are still on-prem, then Oak9 has we have a really good, good support for hybrid workloads as well. And then, a lot of our customers, care about not only, security, but they care about compliance. And, what we want to be able to say here is, what are some of those compliance frameworks that you as an organization, your security practice, or even the industry that you're on are trying to adhere to? So as an example, a lot of our healthcare customers, subscribe to, high trust, and they have, sensitive data that they're accessing. So they care about HIPAA. Some of our fintech customers are, interested in making sure that they are compliant to PCI and GDPR, and there are often they're following CSF standards. And what we can do is we can actually help you not only secure your workloads, but we can help you understand, how is your compliance posture. And the last couple of questions here are really around, what types of data is this workload using? Is this a, analytics application that's maybe using publicly available data? Maybe it's, we talked about the PII data in the healthcare side. Maybe it's business sensitive data that this application or workload is using. What's the, confidentiality and importance to that for this workload, right? And what's its significance to the business itself? And then the last questions around, who are the end users of this application? Is this, publicly available over the internet that's accessed by your consumers? Maybe it's a web application. Maybe it's a set of APIs that your B2B partners are accessing. So once we understand these answers to these questions, Oak9 can then, take as its input these questions, and then we can dynamically apply that blueprint. So Mansi, you talked about, how do...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? A quick question there. So with the
Please,
compliance standards that you just picked, is that kind of where the blueprints come in? So those are the blueprints that you have defined, and then based off of what criteria you pick, Oak9 decides on the blueprint?
So Mansi, think of our blueprints as security reference architectures. And what under the hood, these blueprints are built using our security as code framework. And what this security as code framework takes as an input, is attributes of your business use case, right? So the kinds of attributes that you were defining there, what are your compliance and regulatory needs, as well as a rich representation of what your application architecture is, right? Whether we learn that through Terraform or we learn that through our cloud integration that, I'm sure we'll show shortly. And so the idea is that we take all this input, and then our security as code dynamically decides what security requirements apply, where do they apply across this application architecture, what is the level of rigor at which these requirements need to be met at, and what is the impact if this requirement is not met. And when it comes to compliance, then, right, like if you specifically selected NIST CSF, if you selected PCI, right, that is helping us ensure that all of the requirements that those frameworks have, that we are including those requirements and applying them to your application architecture. And then we can report back from the perspective of those frameworks, right? So that at any given point, you can get a real-time report to say, hey, how am I doing against high trust? Well, here's all the things, the hundreds of things that you're doing to satisfy high trust requirements. How am I doing against PCI, right? And here's the hundreds of things that you're doing to satisfy PCI requirements. Like all of these frameworks are, at the end of the day, trying to guide you towards best practices. And so what we've done is we've built our own security control framework, and we map it to all these frameworks so that we can go back and forth and we can translate from one to the other. So we can say, okay, well, your auditor would like to understand how you're doing against PCI. Well, here's a report on that. You want high trust visibility. Here's the report on that, right? And we can support new frameworks as new regulations and compliance frameworks pop up for your business.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, Owen, continue. Sorry for interrupting.
No, this is great. Keep these questions coming.
Keep it coming. Yeah, and same to the audience as well, right? Like post your questions. We'd love to keep this as interactive as possible.
So, we were talking about how do we integrate into the different CI/CD pipelines and different repositories. So you'll see here that once you've helped us understand what the requirements of the your application or workloads are from a security standpoint, then it's pretty straightforward. You can either directly connect Oak9 with your infrastructure as code. So the example that I walked you all through earlier was the CLI, but we natively integrate into a lot of the CI/CD tools that are very popular. But we also can integrate into code repositories like Bitbucket and GitHub. And so let's take a look how we integrate into GitHub. So for us, I'll start here a brand new integration so everyone gets a feel for how it works. It's pretty straightforward. Once you've answered the question, you have the capability to configure Oak9 into your repository. You have complete control over, are you giving us access to all of the repositories that you'd like to scan? Do you want Oak9 to focus on specific code repository where your infrastructure is? And we require read access so that we understand and can read that infrastructure so that we can provide that insight and visibility similarly to what you saw on the CLI side, and then read-write access to show you our recommendations. And I'll touch on that in a minute, right? So once you've configured the access, what Oak9 will do is we'll come back and we'll pull in all of the different repositories that you gave us access to. And it's as simple as just being able to point us to a specific repository. And here's the project that we created. And once we hit save, give me a second here. Once we hit save here, what Oak9 will do is we'll fetch all of those code repository data. We'll understand what are all the different infrastructure files that are in there along with your application files. And we'll, again, dynamically apply those blueprints, and we'll provide some feedback. So while this is running, I'd love to switch gears and show you guys what that code repository that we selected looks like. So you'll notice again here, I have my application code. I have many, many different assets that I am deploying in AWS. So again, I have my API gateway. I have my load balancer here. So let's take a look at this example here. As you'll see that it can get pretty extensive. I might have some modularized code where I'm applying DynamoDB. All of the different structures that you have, all of the different modular code that you have, Oak9 will pick that up. And similar to how we saw here, you'll notice we came back and we identified on the left here all of the different resources that were being provisioned and being updated in that code repository. And this is our visual interface. We can visualize what are those resources that you're trying to provision, and then on the bottom here, what are those design gaps that Oak9 is identifying. And Mansi, you talked a little bit about those compliance frameworks. So here, we segment our design gaps by critical, high, moderate, and low. And really the intent here is, we don't want to inundate that team with a lot of noise and hundreds of things that they have to address. We really want to help them focus on the most critical things that really help them reduce, their security risk and help them meet their compliance posture. So you'll also notice that, we'll not only identify what are all the different controls that Oak9 applied, what the different compliance frameworks that they wanted to adhere to, how our control framework and the design gaps that we've identified, how they map to these compliance. So you'll notice that a lot of these critical issues that we found, they all impact the GDPR, the NIST CSF, and PCI, PCI compliance. And this really helps the dev teams stay focused and engaged on, hey, what are the most critical things I need to fix? And then, we talked about accessible and, actionable guidance. So, here, as you expand, on the left, what you see are specific issues that Oak9 identified. And then on the right is the recommended changes that I, as a developer, need to make to ensure that, this infrastructure is adhering and compliant and secure. And so you'll notice that there could be tens of specific configurations that map to a specific design gap or a control that is causing Oak9 to identify these design gaps.
Hey, I got a question.
Yeah.
Let's say that someone already created an infrastructure like that. Can they go back and remove some of the compliance or add new compliance, and then will it keep it up and say, hey, now you need to remediate those, or you don't need to remediate the old one that we saw since you remove it or since you add some?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the churn that's happening, both in terms of the changes, not only to the infrastructure, right, but you're absolutely right. There's change in these compliance frameworks and how they are across different versions and different life cycles. Those are also changing. And we have a security team that is really focused on continuously updating that control framework so that we can always stay up to date with these compliance frameworks. And Akash, feel free to jump in, right? In terms of,
I think Rich, in terms of use cases that we're seeing, right, like the regulatory and the compliance landscape that most companies operate in, that landscape is evolving. It seems like every quarter there's a new update to a compliance framework. There's a new compliance requirement that gets placed on companies, right? And so the idea is, how can you continue to evolve your AWS cloud native architecture to maintain that compliance, right? Or demonstrate that compliance for a new framework. And so absolutely, you can change the frameworks that apply to this application. You can remove frameworks. And really, what that's doing on the back end in our platform is it's saying, okay, this compliance framework had these specific requirements. And maybe there's one requirement that's just unique to that framework, right? Like PCI has some very unique thing that they're requiring of their end users, but the other frameworks, right, in terms of their best practices, don't necessarily require it. Well, then we won't report on that, right? That will no longer be an issue for you. And it will dynamically change the next time you commit code, because we will have recognized that, okay, you will have told us that, hey, this is a new set of compliance frameworks I care about. We will appropriately apply the right security design based on those frameworks. Mansi, I also saw some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was actually just about to. So we have a question here that says, basically, Oak9 does a high-level check for compliances in your stack and notifies you of issues.
Yeah, so yes to that question, but it's not just high level, right? We're getting into the nitty-gritty details of your application architecture to understand what this application architecture is doing, what you're trying to deploy, mapping it to a security design in terms of, well, what should you be doing, right, to make sure that you are meeting your own organization's security requirements, your own best practices, as well as the compliance and regulatory needs that you have, and then giving you recommendations on that. So it's really kind of that deep look inside your architecture, but then distilling that down into, as Om said, right, accessible, actionable, achievable guidance that your developers can leverage to easily remediate these issues and, really stay focused on the functional capabilities of the product.
I see that we also, oh, sorry, I was going to say we have another question here. Sorry, are you done answering that one before I switch gears a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then we have another question here that says, can you also add your own custom compliances that your own organization might have?
Yeah, so absolutely. The way our customers are using it right now is, we have defined our own control framework. And what they're doing is they're mapping our control framework to theirs. So a lot of larger organizations have built their own best practices within their organization, right? They have their own set of security requirements that they've defined. And so we can map from our framework to theirs. And then once that mapping is done, right, now we can present that information from the perspective of your, organization specific control framework.
Okay, gotcha. And then, so in terms of I guess it'll notify you that, there are these issues that are existing within your stack or within your infrastructure. But what does remediation look like? So is there any guidance that's provided on how to remediate?
Yeah, I mean, great question, Mansi. So, we saw that we integrated with that code repository, identified all the issues, but, what can we help fix, right? Can we take that development and organization to the last mile? Absolutely, the answer is yes. So let's go. I'm going to switch gears and go back to this repository that we were looking at and we analyzed. What you'll notice here as we were talking is Oak9 came in those few minutes ago, and we actually created that remediation, right? So our goal always is, let's not just tell people what all their problems are. Let's actually fix that for them, right? I'm a lazy developer, so I like automated bots to do my work for me, and that this is exactly what Oak9 will do, right? Is if you're familiar with GitOps flows, we'll actually follow GitOps flows. So we'll create a pull request back to that code repository, and what we'll do is we'll add comments that help the team understand what are all of the different critical design gaps that Oak9 identified, and then what are the remediations. So you'll notice here that there's a set of comments here. And then if I switch over to the files changed, what you'll notice is Oak9 made a bunch of changes across the entire repository. So let's start at the first one here. Oops. You'll notice several things here that I'll point out. Everything is in the green is something that Oak9 added. Everything that's red, that's changing into green, are the changes that Oak9 is making to the existing infrastructure. So what's really cool is here, if there's specific configurations that are actually missing altogether, we'll add them. If there are certain configurations that are missing, but Oak9 is unsure in terms of how that's impacting your architecture, we'll actually still add them as an inline comment so that engineering group can actually, react to it. They can actually review it, and then they can address those changes. So you'll notice here that Oak9 is making pretty extensive recommendations and changes. So it's not just, we're not just focused on those handful of keywords that we want to change from a misconfiguration standpoint. Our goal is really, since we're focused on the entire architecture, we want to make sure that your entire workload that's deployed in AWS and that's codified in this infrastructure is actually secure. So you'll notice here, we're pointing out here that your DynamoDB table, the server-side encryption here should be enabled correctly. So this is set as false today. We want to make sure that it's updated correctly, and down to even stylistic things, right? So in some instances there might be multiple choice, and we'll point them out. And as over time, our engine will learn and say, okay, in this instance you have multiple choices. Here's an inline comment. You want to either set it to SSL or HTTPS, and then the next time around, we'll want to learn your patterns and your stylistic changes, and then we'll learn and we'll update on that behalf. And as we go down here, you'll notice that there are quite a few changes that Oak9 will all of the design gaps that we've identified will actually go and update and create that remediation by way of pull request.
Hey, I do have another question.
Yeah.
Others Oak9, like keep up with drifting changes. What I mean by that is, let's say a developer go manually and add something or remove something without going through the whole repo. Others Oak9 can pick up that change also and take some actions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. What happens when you're already post deployment, that engineer has made some changes, right? And those changes are not reflected in this infrastructure as code. Absolutely. We can pick up those changes because we can also plug in to your currently running environment in your AWS, and we can continue to continuously monitor that for that drift. And then we'll immediately, if we detect a drift, we'll immediately notify that engineering team, that DevOps team through their channel of choice, be it Slack, be it Teams, be it email. Our goal is really again to be covering that entire software development lifecycle, right? We want to start left, and we want to move as that workload is moving and progressing from code to deployment, and then post deployment, it's running in production. We'll continue to monitor that workload, and I can, Rich, I can show you that example here as well.
Yeah, and by the time we do have a chat on fire here, Mansi, I don't know if you want to go through some of the
Yeah,
questions.
let's take a pause here and answer a few more questions.
Yeah, we have two questions in the chat. So the first one is, does it do any kind of validation or testing to make sure that the changes work and don't break other stuff by mistake, or is that up to the developer that's maintaining the infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the advantages that we have in dealing with infrastructure as code is languages like CloudFormation and Terraform. They are declarative. And so when we make changes to the code, we have very high confidence in how that's going to impact the deployment that's about to be made. And so from that perspective, we we have confidence in the changes that we're making. And one of the things that we do, right, in validating our changes is we don't just look at individual configurations. We actually look at your entire application architecture and how different configurations relate to each other, so that when we make a change, we have incredibly high confidence that that change isn't going to break anything. That when different configurations are related, that we're actually suggesting changes across all of those configurations. Even things like variables, right? You might define a variable, and if we make a change to a variable and its value, we want to go and comment every single place where that variable was used, so that developer has full transparency and visibility into the changes we're making. And at the end of the day, right, we do want that developer to review every change, just following good software development best practices, right? Just making sure that we are assessing, that development teams are following these best practices, assessing every change, and then really accepting changes only if they make sense. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I mean, if you guys have follow-up questions on anything that Omen Akash is saying, definitely still feel free to add it to the chat. And then we have one other question that was, can we integrate with Lambda to automate the remediations as well?
Yeah, so can we clarify that question a little bit? What do we mean by integrate with Lambda?
So I think the question here is, if I understood it correctly, right? Like typically you could use Lambdas to make changes to your environment post deployment. Absolutely, that's a one way, right? You can kind of remediate your infrastructure, but the challenge is, right, by that point you've already deployed a lot of this infrastructure, right? It's been running in your environment, and it's a somewhat complex architecture to maintain and manage. What we are really doing through the code repository integration that Om was showing, right, is we want to catch these issues as this code is being written. And so, it's not happening post deployment, it's happening at the point in time where code is getting committed. And so that we can impact it early, so you don't have to make post deployment remediations. If you're touching a live environment and you're impacting it but through automation using a Lambda, right, there's always a risk, going back to the earlier question, right, that you might break something because that is a running environment. It didn't go through, your change doesn't go through, unit tests, integration tests, right?
Yep.
It doesn't go through the life cycle. And so, we feel like it's a better approach to really catch these issues early in the life cycle.
Yeah, definitely. It's basically catching it before it even becomes an issue. That makes sense.
Exactly. Awesome. So, Rich, you talked a little bit about, how do we do drift? Can we plug into the API based, integration of a running workload? So I can share that example. Let me share my screen back here so that you guys able to see my desktop. So so how do we integrate into the currently running deployed environment that you have in your AWS? So, here's an example of how we can do that. It's pretty straightforward. All we really need is a read-only access to your account. It's a simple IAM role with the AWS managed read-only audit role, which is a read-only policy. And what we can then do is once you've given us that access, we can immediately pull in all of your configurations that's running live in your environment, and we can then help you understand, how is, what is the current status of that entire environment. You help us kind of draw the boundaries of that workload that's running in the cloud, and we can immediately, the same way we did with the GitHub repository integration with the CLI, we can immediately give you that feedback, right? And then that really enables you to then focus on identifying that drift. We talked about, being able to then notify you through Slack and Teams and other developer channels of choice. So, I'll walk you through an example here of, so what you'll notice here is, Oak9 went in and pulled in a bunch of different assets. For this particular example, we've connected this to our sandbox environment, where we've purposefully left some things open just to show you this and share an example here. So what we'll do is, I know a few of the assets that map to my workload. So I'll go ahead and select a couple of these here. So I have my K8s, my container architecture that's deployed across my load balancers. I know I have some Lambda functions that are running here. So I'll select a couple of those. I know that we talked about and showed the DynamoDB and the S3 bucket. Let me see here if I can find my table. And once you've helped us understand what are all the different components that are in your architecture, what Oak9 will do is we'll pull in real-time configurations of all of your assets, and then we'll immediately give you that feedback and visibility. So what you'll notice here, what's really interesting is I had picked a handful of resources, right? About 5 or 6 of these. I had picked my DynamoDB table, my S3 bucket, a couple of my Lambda functions that are connected to my API gateway, and my load balancer that's routing the traffic. And you'll notice what Oak9 did here. We actually found that there were far more components that were connected in this architecture. They were connected through network boundaries. They were connected, through network communication. There were some role-based access control, like IAM roles that were applied. And what Oak9 can do is actually we can draw out, and not only we understand all of the different components that are connected, but we can actually draw them out and give you that visual through a graph, right? So this is an internal, an entire workload that you have to give you that visibility and richness of, hey, here are the things that you identified, but there's far many more things in your architecture that Oak9 detected, and will not only give you that visibility, but we'll immediately give you that design gap feedback by applying our blueprint, right? So the same way we saw earlier, here's our visual canvas, shows you can highlight and see for a specific asset. So this is a load balancer. What are all the different components that it's connected to? Looks like it's deployed in a VPC that has a lot of different subnets. I have my KX controller that's connecting to my ECS instances. So I am able to now not only gain that visibility, but Oak9 will actually cover all of the things that I may not have realized that are running in my current environment, and we'll provide that feedback and the design gap across all of them. So Rich, just wanted to pause and see if this is, what you were referring to, and make sure that we answered your question.
Exactly, exactly. And I really appreciate you going through all this and showing us all Oak9 works in the back end. Thank you.
Yeah, got it.
We have a sort of related question in the comments that's asking, does it also work with multiple nested stacks?
Yeah, so that's really a great question. We are planning on releasing that support in sometime in April, Mansi. Full support for that CloudFormation stack, including nested stacks that folks have. We're actually working pretty closely with the AWS CloudFormation team to enable a lot of the new capabilities that are getting released as part of the CloudFormation capabilities.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I know nested stacks can get really complicated to keep track of things. So yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah, our team's hard at work, and we're gonna get it out to our customers as soon as we can.
At the end of the day, though, the capability that we've built is really focused on, right? If I understand the language that the infrastructure as code is being, the infrastructure as code language that this infrastructure is going to be deployed using, we want to translate what's in the code to an application architecture. What is that application architecture? And if it's nested stacks, right, at the end of the day, it translates to some architecture that you're trying to deploy. And as we get visibility into that architecture, then we can help you, address your security challenges for that architecture, regardless of, what IC language you use, as well as, whether things were nested or not, right? And so we're somewhat, independent of that.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
By the way, side comment, love the comments about my hair. 100% aloe vera gel is all I'm going to say.
Someone is jealous.
Some of us don't have those daily challenges.
It's a simpler life that you live on.
It is. I don't have to spend first 15 minutes of my day, Akash, just on my hair. So
yeah, I was just going to ask how much time you spend on your hair.
I think Mansi depends who you ask. If you ask his wife, you'll get the real answer. If you ask him,
I wake up like
he'll say 30 seconds. Yeah, exactly.
1 minute.
All right. I was just looking through if there were any other questions on the chat that we can help address or answer. Let's see here.
I think we got most of them.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, keep those questions coming. Love all the questions, and happy to take it in another direction. If if folks on the channel want to see a specific capability of the product, or if they have specific questions around the capabilities. So, I just want to, take a little bit of a pause, right? So far we've kind of really talked about, how do you start from when you're changing that code base? How does Oak9 integrate, right? So we integrate with our CLI, and then as your code is getting committed, we can integrate into your code repositories. We can give you that remediation so that it really takes the burden away from you as a DevOps group, as a infra engineer, to have to actually understand the security implications. You can simply review and approve that PR or make those recommended changes. And then, we talked about, as you go into deployment, how do we detect for that drift? How do we understand and think about that application architecture through the graph, and alerting through Slack and Teams notifications, right? So some of the other things I'd love to share is, a lot of our customers, talk about, being able to, have limited time to resolve some of these issues that we're finding. So how do we do that? Can they create and customize some of the policies that are specific to their organizations that maybe, don't align with what Oak9 is finding? And, what we can actually do is we have the ability directly within the platform for those teams to be able to snooze these design gaps, right? So they can say, hey, we're still developing certain features. That's why, this particular design gap that Oak9 identified is not something I need to deal with now. And, with the click of a button, you can snooze these design gaps. And what Oak9 will do is Oak9 will come back and remind the team later if they're actively working on the feature. You'll notice that our critical design gap shifted into the snooze bucket, and we'll come back and remind them. As a team, if you want to create certain exceptions to make sure that a lot of the feedback that Oak9 is providing, if they are not aligned to your organization's policies, or if you already have a mitigating design in place, then we also have a way to do that by creating policy exceptions within the tool. So you can say, hey, for this given project, I want to be able to create an exception. And what Oak9 will do is relatively simple. We will auto fill in. So you'll notice here, this was applied to this project. We'll, for audit purposes, we'll fill in all the details, and then we'll add any of the rules that we have behind that our security as code framework has. We'll add that automatically, and then literally it's create and you're off and running in your policy exceptions.
Yeah, and I think we have a last question here in the chat also, where what the question is, if Oak9 can identify several issues, can they force override the deployment and prevent infrastructure from being deployed when a severe issue is discovered?
Yeah, that is really great question. So I'll take that second question first. We absolutely want to give the engineering teams complete. By the way, I feel like my Windows has sun. So, we want to give complete flexibility to the development and engineering groups to, let them operate under the way that they see fit, right? So we can absolutely, put that flexibility and onus back on the engineering group to say, hey, if you want to, in Sandbox, you want to allow this CI/CD pipeline to pass because the development teams is just rapidly churning features or testing certain capabilities, then it's up to you to pass that pipeline through. But as you get up to higher environments like staging or UAT or even production, you can absolutely stop that pipeline from moving forward on the design gaps that Oak9 has found. And I can share that example on how we can do that. So we can do that in several different ways. So we natively have plugins in the CI/CD pipeline for Jenkins. We support, GitHub Actions. So as an example, let me share that GitHub Actions example so that you can get a sense for it. So GitHub Actions are that CI/CD pipeline, and what you can do here is you can actually say, hey, you'll notice that in this example, this pipeline ran. It's marked as successful because Oak9, this pipeline was configured with passing even if Oak9 identifies critical issue, right? So if we look into this pipeline, I can notice that Oak9 has found a bunch of different critical and high moderate design gaps, but the pipeline was successful. And in the same instance, the question that's being asked is what happens if you're moving up in higher environments and you want to fail that pipeline? So we can absolutely do that as well. So I showed and share kind of the GitHub example here. I can also share that example through a different pipeline. So if you have a more of a declarative pipeline, you'll notice here that I have a declarative pipeline in ADO, and I can show that, hey, here's my quality gate. My quality gate is anytime Oak9 has identified a critical design gap, go ahead and fail that pipeline, right? So let's set that up and let's run this pipeline to see that example. And what should happen here is, again, Oak9 will seamlessly, once we understand your project's requirement, we will seamlessly fit into, whether it's code repository, whether it's CLI, whether it's CI/CD pipeline, we'll fit into that workflow. We want to be seamless. We want to be, really staying out of the way of that development, that engineering group. But we really want to enable them that velocity and flexibility that they desire. So here, my pipeline's getting kicked off. You'll notice there's a bunch of other tasks that are running, and here's my Oak9 analysis task that's running. And what should happen here is, in this instance, this pipeline should fail, because as a developer, as an engineer, I've marked this to fail on all critical design gaps that Oak9 has identified, and I have complete control and flexibility in how I configure this. I can do that based on severity. Hopefully that answers the question. And here we go. This returned. So let's look at. You'll notice that we found critical design gaps, but we're stopping the pipeline. And let's take a look at what that result looks like. So you'll notice that we mark this in your pipeline as an error. We found the critical design gaps. You can immediately, built into the same workflow that you're in, same tool that you're operating on, Oak9 will give you a nice summarized view of what we found. And then if you want to take a look at a detailed view, you can always, with a click of a button, come back into our console and take a deeper look and deeper dive into why this pipeline is failing, and what are the issues that you need to resolve and fix to address the pipeline failure.
Hey, I'm glad to see that flexibility and autonomy that you're giving to developers, and why giving this amazing products. That's really awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a guiding principle inside our organization that OM has established, which is stay out of the developer's way. Make
That's
life
right.
easier for them and stay out of their way. Let them do what they do best. And you'll see that every integration we've built, right, has really been geared towards giving that developer flexibility and freedom to choose the feature capabilities that they want, to choose the way they want to architect their pipelines and their own development workflows. And we will fit seamlessly in, no matter what choices they make. And that's our objective.
We have one other question here in the comments that's saying, are all of these capabilities also available in the CLI version?
Yeah, so the CLI is first class for us. It's it's available in all the different platforms, and you can also integrate CLI. We have published a Docker container that integrates that CLI that you can fit into a pipeline for a specific CI/CD tool or capability that we don't support. So absolutely, you can take that CLI. And for example, if you're using AWS deploy, AWS CI/CD tool, you can absolutely take that Docker container as an agent and run it into your choice of CI/CD tool. So absolutely.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I can see you evading the sunlight, and I feel.
I know, I'm trying my best.
Yeah.
In Chicago, we don't get a lot of sunlight, so this is new for me. Let me see if I can kind of switch my angle here, and
no, it's all good. It's funny, the one day you don't want there to be sun, and it shows up at the right time.
Yeah, it's always the case.
Why are we live? The sun says, I'm gonna show up.
It's the daylight savings. I'm telling you, it's ruining everything.
It's not complaining. We need it.
Yeah, it's not working. I can't escape it. We'll just have to wait. On the daylight savings, looks like Senate has approved it. So if it passes, we may not have to worry about it ever again. So
that would be amazing. Awesome. Yeah. So we just have another follow-up question there. I guess an unrelated question. So at a previous company, we spent about 6 months preparing for an IPO. And part of the IPO process was to begin adherence to 2 new industry regulatory requirements. And our CSO asked for regular updates on progress of compliance with our available tools at the time. were fairly weak. So does Oak9 offer any reporting/metrics around compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we can enable that through reports. You can directly download a detailed report down to the individual configurations across across the entire application or workload. And it's just a deep Excel document that you can download. We also have a pretty nice dashboard. So if you have a director or CISO or C-level folks that are really interested in, better understanding, how a particular team or a particular application, or even as an enterprise you're doing across, all of the different compliance frameworks that you want to adhere to, you can. So what you're seeing here is an aggregated view across the entire enterprise, right? So here are all of the different compliance frameworks that I've selected, and since I use this tenant as a demo environment, I've literally selected every compliance framework that you can imagine. But you can also drill down into the specific application, right? So let's look at that GitHub example that we selected, and we selected. Oops, I think I might have gotten the wrong one here. Let me look at this cloud example. So we selected NIST and high trust, right? And instantaneously I can better understand how compliant I am, right? So this particular application that we just looked at, by connecting to the currently running workload in the cloud, you can notice then see that this is 82% compliant with NIST CSF. And if I focus on the high trust here, it's 80% compliance. And then you have ability to have an interactive view in terms of how many resources there are in the application, how you're doing against the number of design gaps that Oak9 is identifying. And then as you sort of move forward across this exercise to become more compliant, we can even track trends, right? So this is a brand new application, but we will continue to monitor and trend and do trend analysis for those teams and for those CISOs, so that they can better understand that how their teams are actually burning down to addressing a lot of these design gaps and issues that Oak9 is identifying.
Awesome. Let us know if that answered your question, or if there's anything else that you wanted to clarify on a little bit more. And then I did have one other question. So in terms of, switching gears and going back to the blueprints a little bit, how do you guys decide what's necessary to secure the applications? How do you guys decide what to include in on these blueprints?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, right? The way these blueprints are really security reference architectures as code. And so think of them as kind of different reference architectures for how we want to secure workloads in AWS. And the way we kind of decide, well, what are the best practices we should follow, right? Is, we look at sources like AWS. AWS publishes reference architectures and best practices. We support, for example, the foundational technical review that Mansi and Rich, I'm sure you're well familiar with, right? So if you're an AWS partner, you went through that foundational technical review, and there's a lot of people process related requirements in that review, but then there's also some technical requirements, and typically, right, you manage those and you check those, by kind of asking questions, right, of the partner to make sure that they're following those best practices. What we are doing is we are taking sources like these, along with Cloud Security Alliance, NIST, OWASP, right? All of these industry organizations that build best practices and reference architectures for cloud. We take those reference architectures and we bake them into our security as code, codify them within our security as code. And then based on the use case, based on your business requirements, based on the compliance needs, right? Like all of those attributes that I was talking about before, we are then able to dynamically, apply the right reference architecture and tailor that reference architecture for your use case. And so that way, the advantage you have is you are getting something tailored and applicable to you. As a developer, the end result is that you're getting something that is truly understanding what you're trying to build. And it's guidance that you're more likely to then accept and take that last mile and actually remediate the issues that we're finding.
Okay, and then I guess I know we talked about CI/CD integrations, but in terms of like, for any issues that Oak9 finds, can we also like do workflow automation? So maybe like automation with like a ticketing system or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, we today support various different workflows, and our goal, is to be able to again automate as much of the heavy lift as possible, right? So, um, we today support Jira. We have integration with Jira. We have, integration with here. Let me scroll down here. We have integration with ServiceNow. We have integration with ADO boards, and I can walk us through what that experience and integration looks like. So let's maybe just pick up one of the projects that we created earlier, and then let's just let me show you, Mansi, how that works. I have a lot of stuff here, but we'll take this cloud integration example that we've just created, and integrating with Jira or any of those ticketing system is again pretty straightforward. All we really need is a token and an access, right access to connect to it. You can come into that specific project. What I've already done here is for this tenant is I've added that token and that integration. So what you can do is we'll pull in all of the information from Jira. We can so let's do this Jira integration. We'll pull in all the different projects that are available within that Jira. You help us understand, what that project key is, who the user we should assign this particular set of tickets to. I have my favorite character here, Tony Stark, and you can again in the spirit of that flexibility, configurability, right? You can say, hey, I'm always going to create manual tickets. Always create tickets for me, or help me create tickets for any critical design gaps that Oak9 is finding. And once I've configured this, then I can go back and I can, the next validation that I run, Oak9 will create a bunch of tickets for me based on what are all the different critical design gaps that we found here. So let's rerun this validation, and what should happen while this guy is running here is I will go back into my project. I think it was this one. And what Oak9 will do is we'll backlog. Here we go. We'll backlog all of the different tickets into your Jira, right? So we've created some of these are from previous runs here, but let me pull one up just to give a sense of what that looks like here. So Mansi, what we'll do is we'll again, create a very detailed ticket, add it to the appropriate user. We'll give them that guidance. What is that asset or resource that specific design gap is mapped to? Again, focused on that compliance. What are the compliance frameworks that you selected, and how this particular design gap, you were to fix it, how that would help you resolve it. We'll point them to the documentation. And one of the cool things that our customers requested is, hey, what happens when my team resolves these issues? And what we can actually do is we'll track, not only sequence, but track all the status updates to this continuously and dynamically. So as these things get resolved, we'll actually check against your AWS environment to make sure that those specific configurations were actually resolved and addressed. And if they weren't, or if something was missed, we're going to go ahead and reopen the ticket if we were finding the same issue over again. So Mansi, did that help answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was really great. Yeah, definitely having an integration with like Jira or just like any ticketing system in general definitely makes it so much easier to track all the issues that this finds.
And I also want to reiterate that Oak9 is also available in the AWS Marketplace. So basically, click of a button, like.
Yeah, we are a big AWS partner. We're available in AWS Marketplace. You can purchase us with a click of a button. Rich, you said it.
And then are there any options for like maybe a free trial that folks can use to try out this product?
Yeah, absolutely. You can contact us at hello@oak9.io. We can give you free trial. And then, at some point in the near future here, sometime in the April timeframe, we're actually releasing a community edition, which will be a freemium product that folks can self-sign up and try and use. So absolutely. The freemium is coming. And, prior to that, just reach out to us at hello@oak9.io, and we're happy to spin up a tenant for you and give you access to the entire platform.
Sounds great.
Awesome, that sounds great. Cool. So before we wrap things up, were there any other last questions that people had in the comment section? Let me check. I think we're good on the questions. But yeah, I mean, feel free to ask any other questions that you have, any other features that you want Omar Akash to talk about or showcase. Add those in there. And then kind of just, if there's one takeaway from today's episode, Omar Akash, what are you guys hoping for the audience to have learned today?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, I think I'll sum it up. And, to me, it's just really around, enabling agility and velocity and ensuring that, all of your cloud infrastructure is secure and compliant by design, right? We want to be able to help you achieve that as you change that infrastructure. And then, post deployment, like, few folks mentioned in the comments, right, is being able to detect that drift across different environments, being able to, remediate and get alerted when things are changing in your environment. And at the end of the day, it's about making it easy, right? So, how can we make it easy for the DevSecOps teams, the DevOps teams, and the infrastructure developers to enable and continuously operate at that velocity that they desire.
Yeah, yeah. For all the developers, right, that join, really, security doesn't have to be hard. Our job is to really make security easy for you and help you focus on the functional capabilities of the products that you're building. And for your security peers, right, it's about making their lives easier so that they're not, on a day-to-day basis, right, dealing with challenges for a given application bug, given application security defect, right? They're focused on building design patterns, reference architectures that strategically will help the organization, move towards a better security posture, while, developers and security champions within development teams, right, can make sure that, security is incorporated into every product and every feature that's shipped in the organization.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the focus is all about shifting security to the left. And yeah, Oak9 does a great job of doing that. And then we have one last very important question in the comments that's asking, are you hiring?
Yes, we're hiring. We're actively hiring. If you want to work for an amazing group of people, work with amazing group of people, we are a fun bunch, and we are absolutely hiring.
Get your answer.
There's a
Yeah.
careers page on our website. Check us out and definitely apply.
Yeah, I can definitely second that. I've been working with Akash and Om and their team for a couple of months out, and they've been really, really amazing. So yeah, no, they're an awesome group.
I mean, I heard them mention FTR. I mean, after that, I'm just excited. That's all.
Yeah, did somebody say FTR?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so before we wrap things up, Rich, do you just want to kind of summarize who we are and what we do, and close this out for us?
Yeah. I mean, first thing first, we hope that you learn about our friends at Oak9 and all they can help you build and provide automation, consistency, and predictability when building and software releasing your application. And this is one thing. And as you already know, this is Howdy Partner. But before we wrap things up, we want to ask our friends at Oak9 to choose 3 phrases that they want to sign off of. 3 phrases. What do you want to choose, guys?
I'll say happy trails.
Happy trails. What about you, Gizica? Mansi?
I like giddy up. We could do giddy up.
Giddy up. Okay, Akash?
Enjoy the journey.
Enjoy the journey. I like that one. Let's get it. Giddy up, happy trails, and see you all next time. Enjoy the journey. Happy development, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mansi. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot. And yeah, go check out Oak9. Check out their products. See what all of their awesome offerings. And yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Happy trails.
Cheers. Happy trails indeed.
Bye, everyone.
Next time.